In our admittedly very brief overview of the main ideas in Islam, violence, war, struggle, conversion isn't listed as one of the 5 pillars, but if you watch sort of the public display of Islam around the world, you would almost think that jihad is a 6th pillar. Could you blame people for thinking that?
No, I don't think so, and I think, frankly, there are some Muslims who would agree that jihad is a 6th pillar. But I mean, I think it's important to understand, as Dalia and this book so brilliantly portrays, that it's often the case that the loudest voice is going to be the voice that is heard, that's going to be drowning out the voices of moderation. You know, people always ask me all the time, why don't we see, the voices of moderate Islam in the media? Well, there's a very simple reason for that, because it's boring. It's not news. News is violence and sex and threat. And so it's only natural that that's what we hear about when we turn on our television. But I think we need to be careful not to make the fundamental mistake of confusing the loudest voice for the majority voice.
But there is violence, though.
Of course there's violence.
Well, Ray, I'd like to just interject with a study that was done on media content analysis in TV news media in the United States, and it found that the majority of protagonists portraying Islam were militants. More than 50% of representatives of the faith were militants, in contrast to other faiths like Christianity and Judaism, where those representing those faiths were religious leaders.
So in the case of Islam, we're giving the privilege of describing the religion to people who hold a very minority view?
Absolutely, and not only a minority view, but a sliver of the actual makeup of the Muslim community are people who take up arms. And so you've got a fraction of 1% being blown up as the majority in the representation of Muslims in TV news media. And that leads to very skewed perceptions.
Well, Dalia, you polled Muslims around the world specifically on these questions, on whether attacks on civilians are ever justified. Let's show our viewers what you found.
Okay.
Strong majorities in some of the world's largest Muslim countries say attacks on civilians are never justified, including Pakistan at 86% and Indonesia at 74%. What do you think is behind those numbers?
In majority Muslim countries, you find a very interesting pattern when it comes to support for violence. And so when we unpack the numbers, those that support violence, what makes them different than the mainstream? And what we see is that they're actually not more religious. So religious fervor is not what's driving that support. We've actually done even further research where we've asked them to explain their position on attacks on civilians. And those who support attacks on American civilians specifically talk in terms of political ideology. They say that the United States kills civilians, so this is their rightful punishment. They talk about the U.S. being an imperialist power trying to control the world. Not a single one of them, not even one, cited a verse from the Quran to justify their support of attacks on civilians. In contrast, those who said that attacks on civilians were wrong, they justify that position in many cases using religious justifications, by explaining that Islam prohibits murder, by actually quoting from the Quran verses that prohibit killing innocent people.
It's just that question that I think bedevils Americans as they try to think this through.